So Christine's going to talk more about kind of our harassment policy and how we look at treating each other in general. But as you all know, there's a lot of kind of talk in the press. It's kind of a new concept for a lot of people. It's not new at Erin Hills. Anybody who's been part of training has heard us talk for the last 5 to 7 years about our harassment policy and how we feel about people treating each other, and that there is a zero tolerance policy at Erin Hills. And everybody should know that. Everybody should reinforce it with everybody else. If there's ever an issue, come immediately to your manager and talk about it. If you don't ever feel like it's resolved, come immediately to me. And know that that is just the way we run our business. And we've run our business that way for the whole time I've been here, and Rich has been here, and everybody else. And we feel really strongly about it. And we feel really strongly about it because it's one of the 3 pillars that we talked about, this being a great place to work. And if we want this to be a great place to work, it's got to be a great place to work for everybody. And so what people might have thought of in the past, which is, oh, it's not a big deal, or this happens all the time, or this is just what people say or do, not here. And I just want people to know that. And I want people to know that that's because we want it to be a great place to work. We want it to be a great place to work for everybody. The other thing that I mentioned this morning, I'll just mention one more time. It's the same thing with guests. We're here to serve our guests, but we're here to serve guests that are appropriate. Any guests that aren't appropriate, again, you don't have to worry about offending them. You don't have to worry about us coming back and saying, oh, there are guests, you shouldn't have said that back to them, or you should have allowed it, it should have been okay, it wasn't a big deal. It is a big deal. And we have no problem asking guests to leave and never come back if they're not appropriate to our staff. So you're hearing that from me. I'm as close to the top as you can get at Erin Hills outside of Andy, and Andy and I talk about it all the time, and we feel exactly the same. So just know that I think the good news about it, we're very strict, we're very focused on it, we've cared about it for years, but know that we care about it because it's part of making this a great place to work. So with that, I'll introduce Christine Laughlin, who will tell you a little bit more about the details of it, but I think you need to know that it's kind of part of our DNA in general.
Great. So let me tell you a little bit about how I am going to talk with you about the policy. Some background, I'm an employment lawyer. I am an employment lawyer that's been doing this for over 25 years. Don't ask me how old I am. I'm old. I am a golfer. I frequent clubs quite a bit. And I actually advise on employment issues of various golf courses across the country, not just in Wisconsin. And with the recent news media mania on this quote-unquote Me Too movement, how many of you have heard of it? Yeah. Our golf courses have had a lot of discussions pre-season about how to address what really has been an epic change on how the legal system is looking at harassment and sexual harassment in general, and frankly, not only just unlawful harassment, but harassment that is just a matter of boorish behavior, inappropriate behavior, and misconduct that makes somebody feel uncomfortable. In your environment and what you're about to embark on, you're going to come face to face with potentially some situations that are going to make you feel uncomfortable, and you're not going to know what to do. And so the first set of training that I did for Erin Hills actually had to do with the supervisors and the managers. And we sat down, we talked about the policy, we talked about some of the basic legal principles, but we also reviewed specific scenarios. And based on the review of the specific scenarios, I'm standing before you today. Because the supervisors and managers' point is, these are great, now we know what we should do, but we want all of the employees to understand what their role is, what they should not have to put up with, and where to go and what to do when they experience it, okay? Any questions so far? There's a test at the end, by the way. Okay, let's talk about the basic legal principles, all right? Under the laws that we have, both federal laws and state laws, you have two different types of unlawful harassment. It's either quid pro quo. Does anybody know what that means? Anyone know Latin? This for that, or it's a hostile work environment. And to be unlawful, it has to be actions based on some sort of protected characteristic. Anybody know what a protected characteristic is when I use that phrase? It's a very legal phrase, but it's very practical. If you're a woman, is that a protected characteristic? That's an easy one, guys. Yes? Yes. Gender. Under some circumstances, men as well are considered protected under the law. It's called reverse discrimination claims. What other protected characteristics? I mentioned it when I introduced myself. Age. Yes. Guess when you turn old under the laws. Never. Yeah. 40. Doesn't that seem young? Probably not to you all as I look at the audience, but it does to me. 40 years old and above is a protected characteristic. So think about all those age jokes, those senior jokes. That would be a problem. What about disability? Vet status? Sexual orientation? Now we know gender identity, at least for our good state. So any protected characteristic. Quid pro quo, this for that harassment used to be, prior to the last 8 months, something that I would tell you is very rare in the workplace. It's a situation where somebody in power tries to use it against you to have you do something that you don't want to do based on a protected characteristic. The most common is sexual harassment. Anybody hear of Harvey Weinstein Company? Right? So he sits down and is a potential employee of his company at the casting couch, and he says, if you watch me shower naked, I'll give you the part. Okay? This for that. Is Harvey up here having the power against the actress down here? Absolutely. That's the most unique aspect about quid pro quo. Hostile work environment is much more common. Hostile work environment, you heard about with Matt Lauer. Does everybody know Matt Lauer? I saw Matt Lauer a week before he was actually fired. Hostile work environment is where the actions, the comments, make it so uncomfortable that you cannot work in your environment. And the standard is severe or pervasive, not both. So severe, think about the worst comment, the worst touching, the worst proposition as a coworker, or pervasive, constant comments that are inappropriate. Okay? Can anybody give me an example of a sexist comment?
Men play better golf.
Men play better golf. Did anybody hear about the memo about the woman who actually was an engineer at Uber and left? Where it was actually talked about in terms of the stereotypes of the women versus men, yeah. What are comments that are gender-based that you believe are inappropriate? Oh, come on. I'm not going to have you tell me a dirty joke, but comments. She's stacked. Anything else you can think of? No? Not one? If somebody were to say to you, gosh, you're at Erin Hills and you're new and I've got a lot of pull around here, go on a date with me. Is that inappropriate, do you think? It is if it's unwelcomed, am I right? What if it's welcomed?
I don't think a situation like a setup is appropriate.
Okay. So by the virtue of the comment saying, you know, I've got a lot of pull around here, what does that do? That elevates that person into a position of authority, right? So potentially, if the individual being propositioned is uncomfortable with that, what should that person do? What could that person do? That coworker. Report it to the supervisor. If you felt comfortable, what could you say? When somebody asks you out on a date and you don't want to go, what do you say? No thanks. Right. The problem becomes when it becomes repeated. And repeated so that it rises to the level of pressure. Okay? So quid pro quo, hostile work environment, severe, and pervasive. All right. So take a look at your policies that you pull out. It's actually one policy. Multiple pages, should be. Everyone have it? All right. So the very beginning part of this talks about the culture and the pillars here at Erin Hills. And I can tell you from experience that what Andy Bush tells you is not only just words, but action. They take it very seriously here in terms of anti-harassment and enforcing this policy. And there's a certain procedure that we advise them to follow when pursuing complaints. What this policy does is really help you identify when you're experiencing it, when you're witnessing it, what your obligations are under the policy, how is it going to be resolved when it comes forward, and then any of the remedial action. All right, so we're going to walk through this, and then what we'll do is we'll walk through the scenarios. All right. When and where does this policy apply? It applies here, of course, at Erin Hills. But you're going to notice, as you read that paragraph, it also applies off-site. What? Christine, what are you talking about? How can that be the case? How is it that this policy applies at the bar at the Fox and Hounds? Or down at Summerfest where we meet up and have a few beers or more? At the Miller Oasis. Why is that the case? Because the law recognizes that any type of inappropriate conduct, any unlawful harassment that may occur off-site, if it impacts an employee's ability to do their job here, it's our problem. Okay? So, perfect example. You guys decide, it's the first couple of weeks here, everybody's really stressed. Let's go out after work and let's have some cocktails. And it's somebody's birthday. All right? Everybody goes out. And there's a group that gathers, and everybody ends up staying. They do a few shots, everybody's, having a good time. They stay, a band starts up, and they start to dance. And one of your coworkers decides to get handsy. And in this case, real life scenario, it was actually the woman who is getting handsy with the subordinate employee that she supervised. Okay? So the bottom line was, by the end of the night, she propositioned him. And she propositioned him in the back hallway. And the next day, he doesn't show for work. So HR calls and says, you didn't show up for work. What's going on? And what do you think he's going to say? What do you think he's going to say? This didn't happen at this golf course, by the way. It was a different one. But what do you think he's going to say? Unfortunately, nothing, I'm sick. I just decided to stay home, nothing, I'm sick. But then, who else was there? The other coworkers. And pretty soon, the rumor mill starts, and pretty soon it gets to HR, and it's found not to be a rumor. So HR goes back to the individual who, by the way, has been sick now all week long, sick, and sits him down and calls him in and says, what is going on? Is this true? Did this happen? Now, when we sat down and we talked to the supervisor, what was her comment? It's none of your business. I mean, I didn't force them all to go there and have drinks and celebrate the birthday of Shauna. I mean, that's just what happened. It was by their own choice. So why is this my problem, and why am I about to lose my job? It's because the law recognizes that in a situation where somebody believes that they're being harassed to the point where they can't come to work, there's liability for the golf course. They have to take action. In this case, she was fired. And the reason why she was fired is because she didn't believe, she refused to believe, that what she did was wrong. It's kind of, you can't fix it if the individual doesn't realize it's broken. Does that make sense? What was most disappointing to me was the guy. Because I look out for the client, but I'm human. And my whole point is, I've been trying to get this golf course from a culture standpoint where they want to be. And they're trying super hard to get there. But they can't if they don't know what happened. Okay? All right. What kinds of harassment is prohibited? We talked about it. But there's a last sentence in that paragraph I want you to read. Behavior that does not rise to the level of unlawful harassment. Think quid pro quo, hostile work environment that you and I talked about. But nonetheless constitutes harassment, will also be treated as misconduct under this policy. This is the impact the Me Too movement has had in my world. Even though it may not be severe or pervasive, even though it may not be a quid pro quo, the courts and the federal agencies and the state agencies enforcing these employment laws do not accept now boorish behavior that is allowed to go unchecked. inappropriate conduct that's allowed to go unchecked. Not only is it against the culture of Erin Hills, but from a legal perspective, I'm telling you that the law now, the standard has been lowered in terms of what it's going to tolerate in harassing behavior. So that one comment that's off color, in the old days may not necessarily have raised a red flag legally, but now it does. May not ultimately lead to liability, but it raises a red flag, and it's something to keep in mind. What is sexual harassment? We actually give you the definition here. We give you examples at the end. We're going to go through specific scenarios so we can actually go through those. I don't think it's going to be shocking to anybody in terms of what the examples are, offensive jokes, things that we talked about. And remember that when you talk about protected characteristics, right now in the news, it's all about sex. Okay? Sexual harassment is at the forefront of it. But remember that it actually is any protected characteristic. So any of the age jokes, any jokes based on religion, anything based on racial or national origin, is against the law and not acceptable. And then you get to the next paragraph, which is one that we worked hard on in terms of updating the policy, because we wanted to make sure that you all understood that even though technically it may not raise to the level that you think under the policy, and remember, it's not your job to make that determination, but even inappropriate comments or things that are being done by who? Coworkers, supervisors, guests, vendors, all of the above? Everybody should be shaking their heads yes, absolutely. The way in which we address each scenario, each person, each individual in those categories will differ, and when we go through the scenarios, you'll understand what I mean by that. But we talk about zero tolerance for any harassing conduct. Here are examples of unacceptable conduct: boorish behavior or remarks, bullying, or spreading rumors about an individual, and behavior that's intended to intimidate, embarrass, or put someone down, especially in front of another employee. These aren't made up, folks. These examples are real examples. Okay? All right. If you look at the next paragraph, what should you do if you believe that you're being subjected to harassment or an incident of harassment, whether lawful or unlawful? What if someone tells you about it, an incident where they felt uncomfortable, where they felt harassed? And what about the scenario where you witness inappropriate, boorish, or unlawful harassment? Under either of those scenarios, do you report? If you witness it, and the person who's subjected to the conduct has not come forward, and you know that for a fact, is it your job and your responsibility to support the culture of Erin Hills by coming forward? Andy's back there. You guys better say yes. Right? The answer is yes. We used to never talk about this when we did this training, ever. But what happened with the Matt Lauers and the Harvey Weinsteins and the NPR guy The fact of the matter is that people started coming out of the woodwork saying that they witnessed the behavior, but they never came forward. Remember my example of that golf course trying to improve the culture and support the culture and not being able to because they didn't know. That's what we're trying to get across, is that if you have an incident happen to you, come forward, yes. But if you see it, even if there's not a complaint that's been made, you report it, because there's no other way that the managers, the supervisors, the support teams have the ability to address it. Whether it's a coworker, supervisor, guest, vendor, UPS guy, doesn't matter, all right? And here's the shocker. Under the policy, in the first sentence, it says you must, promptly. What does that mean? Don't wait. What does it also mean? What's must mean? You have to. You have to. It is your obligation and responsibility to come forward. Not all policies are mandatory reporting. This one is. Okay? Once a complaint is made, and a complaint, as we talk about it, can be as simple as somebody saying to the supervisor, gosh, you know, I had a really crappy thing happen to me today. And then proceeds to talk about an incident that involved inappropriate behavior. In other words, it doesn't have to be in writing, it doesn't have to be anything formal, it can be that nonchalant. An investigation will occur. And it's a very formalized process. It is a very discreet process. I can tell you, whether it has to do with harassment or not, if there is a complaint that HR needs to look into, they do so very swiftly. They always seek legal counsel, me, and we end up doing an investigation that involves interviews, and sometimes it can be very quick, and sometimes it takes some time. But the point is that at the end of the day, at the end of the investigation, if remedial action needs to be taken, it is taken, and it's taken swiftly. And that's what the last part of the policy talks about, what will be done to those who violate. One of the questions that always comes up is what happens if there's a bad faith report. We actually talked about this at great length at the last training. What happens if somebody just wants to get somebody in trouble and makes it up? He propositioned me, he's been after me, he's been texting me, it's, I don't want anything to do with them, when in fact you're just really mad and you don't like him and you want to get him in trouble. That would be subject to the policy as well in terms of discipline. That's not good. But for those sitting in this room fearful that that may happen to them, know that that would be dealt with as well during the investigation process. Okay. Any questions on the policy? All right. You have on your last page employee do's and don'ts. Just in case you're nodding off and you're sleeping right now, you can always look back on these, and you should use it as a handy reminder of what you should and should not do and what you can and cannot do. Okay? And hopefully that's going to be more evident when we go through these scenarios. Everybody ready? This is where the test comes in. All right. Scenario 1. Caddies routinely see food and beverage staff outside. Side hugs, statement of, hey, beautiful, what about tonight, are frequent and ongoing. Self-described culture of casual and fun. One caddy, let's call him Cade, becomes extra friendly with a particular female staff employee. Let's call her Karen. Cade approaches Karen and requests her cell phone number so he can text her. Cade's flirtatious behavior with Karen and other female servers is described as routine and emulated, not surprisingly, by other caddies. Karen knows Cade is viewed as a top caddy. Cade knows he is viewed as a top caddy. Coworker observes the ongoing behavior of Cade and approaches Karen to ask if she is okay. Karen responds that it doesn't matter because Cade is a top caddy, but that she is embarrassed and uncomfortable when he is around. On one occasion, Karen tells the head chef that Cade is getting difficult to handle. He looks up and responds that she, Karen, should tell someone and then remarks, "Good luck," because everyone knows Cade is the golden boy. Will you know it when you see it or when you experience it? Was there harassment here in this scenario between Cade and Karen? Yes, I see heads nodding yes. Why? Was there inappropriate behavior? Yeah, what's the inappropriate behavior? Quick, guys, we're gonna get out of here in 15 minutes, quick. What's the inappropriate behavior?
The routine.
Yes, the routine of flirtatious behavior every day. Remember, severe and pervasive. Will you know what to do? If you were the witness and you saw this day in and day out and other caddies doing it, what should you have done the first time you saw it? Report it, absolutely. And what about the chef? Chef doesn't have anything to do with the caddies. What happened when he said, "Good luck, Cade's the golden boy"? How do you think that made Karen feel? Like she shouldn't come forward. And so what happens? It's a problem that perpetuates. In this scenario, what happened was the behavior became so intolerable that the damage was done at the end of the day because people did not come forward. So this is a perfect example where you've got witnesses and you've got an individual who she herself has not come forward. Does it matter that she herself has not complained to somebody? To HR? Does it matter? No. But she kind of did complain, didn't she? She kind of did. That would be my argument. And that individual who heard those words, he's becoming difficult to handle. It makes me feel uncomfortable. Those words should have been your trigger to go to any one of the individuals that's listed, by the way, on your policy to report the behavior. Any questions on that? Okay, number 2. You have a male kitchen staff person is overheard talking with a server who is new to Erin Hills. He asks her personal things about her life. Does she have a boyfriend? Where does she live? Who does she hang out with? How many guys has she slept with? He tells her if she's nice to him, he will show her the ropes. His personal prying continues and is getting louder and more obvious. He and others back in the kitchen say lewd comments about women, often laughing it off. She's stacked. What a hoe. I didn't make these up, guys. But she's tight. No one reports a thing. Time goes by, and the kitchen staff person pressures the server for her phone number. He then demands that she go out with him or he will make her life miserable. Will you know it when you see it or when you experience it? Was there unlawful harassment here? Potentially quid pro quo, right? Because he's in power with her, being the subordinate. What about this whole concept of asking personal questions and getting into the personal life, assuming that the proposition never occurs? Is that enough to rise to the level of inappropriate conduct that needs to be stopped? Yes, if it makes her feel uncomfortable. In that situation, if she felt comfortable, should she have said to him, knock it off. You're making me feel uncomfortable. My personal life is my personal life, and frankly, how many guys I've slept with isn't any of your business. Sure. Are you always going to feel that comfortable to be able to do that sort of reply? No. And statistically, I'm going to tell you, more oftentimes not, you don't. In those situations, it is totally inappropriate and not acceptable at Erin Hills to make lewd comments, to make somebody feel uncomfortable, and to feel pressured to have a relationship with somebody that you don't want. Okay? Any of that occurs, what do? You report it. If you overheard what was going on, and you overheard the proposition, and I'm going to make your life miserable, what do? Good. All right, great. Okay. Scenario 3, I know this is really going to sound rare. Guests are sitting outside, and the outside food and beverage staff are serving drinks. The guests start to flirt with staff, hugging the staff, and getting into their faces. In this particular scenario, the guests were very well served, both on the course and sitting at the clubhouse. The guests start to flirt with staff, hugging them. Then a guest says a sexually inappropriate comment. Do you serve other things up in the room? If so, I'm in. Another guest, very overserved, takes a putter and makes lewd gestures with it in front of the staff. There were no other witnesses other than the staff. Both guests show up for dinner. The same staff are on duty, and they request not to serve the table. And the chef tells them what? Client experience, guest experience. What did the chef say in this situation? What do you think he said? What he really shouldn't. He said, get out there and do your job. Get out there and do your job. Now, what do you want to know in this situation? I would want to know, what does a chef know? Did they say, we don't want to go serve that table, put us somewhere else? Or did they say, we don't want to serve that table because of all of the incidents that occurred? In the real life situation, he was told exactly why they did not want to serve those tables. Now, in that situation, nobody should feel like they have to tolerate that behavior. And I can tell you, in all the golf courses that I advise, this is a very common scenario. People like to drink on the golf course. They like to come back to the clubhouse, especially in an environment like this, and another golf course I have out west, where there's not a lot to do off property, they stay on property. What does that mean? You're going to have to deal with them. And the best way to be able to do that is to know that you do not need to tolerate that type of behavior. That's what we call boorish behavior, okay? And I can tell you that the chef would now know that once he's provided those details, there's no way that he would ever have the wait staff have to go out there and wait on those tables. And in fact, what likely would occur if you did say something is that some supervisor would actually deal with what is going on at that table. So you wouldn't have to. Okay? So what's the moral of the story? Speak up, right? Does not have to be this big deal if we can be proactive and address those issues ahead of time. All right, scenario 4, you ready? All right. Member of XYZ company sends flowers to support staff. When on site, that same representative proceeds to flirt and hug staff. Okay, so PGA rep. Has some favorites. Sends the flowers, comes in, gets really touchy with people. If you witnessed that, would you report it? Tough one, right? I mean, really, is it that big of a deal? But if somebody came forward and said, that makes me feel uncomfortable, I'm going to leave the room because I don't want him touching me, is that enough to take action? Yes. Does it matter that it's XYZ company rep? No. Do you have to say something to XYZ company rep? No. Again, your policy talks about specifically those folks that you can go to report, and there's many different avenues that you can do. But the point is, just because it's a third party who's acting inappropriately or saying inappropriate things does not mean that you need to tolerate it. And that includes guests. Does anybody have any questions? All right, you know what that means? That means now nobody can claim they didn't know what to do, right? Okay, you've been a great group. It's a great place to work. It's going to be a lot of fun, and we need your help to keep it that way. Okay? Thanks.